Sensing this, Violet's expression soured. Suddenly, Mr. Carter shouted,
"Even if you're dating the boss's son, I can't overlook such behavior from an employee." "I'm not. I was just..." "Quiet. Don't make excuses."
Mr. Carter advanced towards her. In a reflex, Violet threw him her recipe notebook.
Ah.
Mr. Carter covered his face and crouched down. Andrew came there.
"What's going on?" "I heard a loud noise, Violet. Are you okay? What happened?"
"Andrew. It's just..." Violet explained everything to Andrew. But, in reality, nothing had happened. Mr. Carter had just found that Violet and Andrew were meeting up. He jumped to unsavory conclusions on his own. Violet, upset by such bizarre suspicions, wore an annoyed expression. This displeased Mr. Carter, who attempted to reprimand her. "So you threw Mr. Carter the recipe notebook, and he ended up like this?" "Yes, I'm sorry." Violet apologized. Meanwhile, Andrew checked on Mr. Carter. The area hit by the notebook was turning red. But luckily, there were no serious injuries.
"I'll report this to the president. You'll be fired immediately."
"That's not fair."
"Shut up. Brace yourself."
Mr. Carter shouted angrily. Then Mr. Carter hurried out of the kitchen. "What should I do, Andrew?" "It's okay. I'll handle it. But if it gets reported to your father, our relationship might be opposed." Violet was most afraid of that.
"Don't worry. I'll always protect you. Andrew, leave it to me."
Later, this incident reached the president's ears. But Violet faced no punishment. It was because Andrew had intervened.
"Andrew protected me."
Violet thought so. Their relationship seemed to grow even stronger. But all of this was also part of Andrew's scheme. A few days later, Violet would come to realize the whole truth. After the kitchen argument, Andrew said something to Violet. "I feel bad asking this, Violet, but can you keep quiet about providing the idea?" "Why?" "You know, because of the matter of Mr. Carter." On the day of the incident, Andrew was alone in the kitchen. While Andrew was working on a new creation, Mr. Carter came in. There was an accident during Andrew's work, and a cooking utensil hit Mr. Carter's face. Andrew wanted to make it seem like that's what had happened. Reluctantly, Violet agreed. "Sorry, Violet. It's actually your recipe. I'll return the notebook later." "It's okay. You coordinated everything to protect me." "Well, yeah. If that's the story we're going with," Mr. Carter agreed to it. Andrew spoke of the effort it took to align their testimonies. Violet felt deeply grateful to Andrew for his efforts on her behalf. However, a few days later, Violet, who had stayed late to clean up, was about to leave after changing. Passing by the office, she heard Andrew's voice. "Andrew's still here. I should say hello." But as she was about to enter, she froze at Andrew's words.
"And that's how it went. Thanks to you, Mr. Carter."
"Mr. Carter, what does that mean?" Pondering, Violet listened closely to Andrew's voice. Soon, she heard Andrew's laughter. Then, his true feelings came out. "Violet's just a convenient tool. Now that I've got her recipes, I don't need her anymore." Violet was stunned. Was I deceived? She covered her mouth, trying hard not to make a sound. But she couldn't stop the tears from flowing. That recipe is really good. It's a waste to let that woman keep it. From there, she could only listen to the truth she didn't want to hear, in Andrew's gleeful voice. He had ordered other pastry chefs to scold Violet. Then he would intervene, earning Violet's trust. He also set up the situation with Mr. Carter, making Violet feel indebted and trapped. And in the confusion of that moment, he was glad to have stolen Violet's recipes. Andrew said that. And then he added, "If she tries to escape,
I'll just confront her with a shocking truth.
Andrew smiled unpleasantly.
What does he mean?
Violet wondered, as Andrew answered himself.
It's about fraud. She's already complicit in it without knowing.
Andrew sneered. At that moment, Violet's mobile phone fell from her pocket. It made a sound as it hit the floor, and Andrew noticed the phone. Violet could see this through the gap in the door.
I have to get away,
she thought, but her legs wouldn't move. Andrew quickly spotted Violet. He looked at her with a menacing expression.
Were you listening? Well, it doesn't matter. If you try to run, I'll just accuse you.
Andrew's lips curled into a smirk. Violet felt an intense fear of that smile. After that, Violet, unable to escape from Andrew, led a life dictated by him. She was also boldly made to help with the fraud he mentioned. However, Violet, being inherently honest and kind, couldn't endure such a life. Eventually, about a month later, Violet was found on the first floor of her apartment. There were no witnesses, but a passerby had heard a loud noise. When they checked, they found Violet lying below her room. According to the police, it's likely Violet did it herself. However, Andrew's laptop was found nearby. Perhaps Violet intended to expose Andrew's fraud by doing so. But the police examined the laptop and found no noteworthy data. I had suspected Andrew, who lived with her, from the moment I heard of the incident. However, on that day, Andrew was not at home. He was out of state for work. So, Andrew couldn't be the culprit. I had no choice but to accept that. Afterward, along with Andrew and his parents, we completed Violet's funeral. Even after everything ended, I remained in a daze. I couldn't bring myself to do anything. If only my husband were here, maybe he could have helped ease the loneliness. Violet, why? That was all I could mutter. I felt powerless. For several days, I cried, thinking that. Then, a week passed after Violet's death. I had to accept the reality of losing Violet. Just as I was beginning to come to terms with it, a letter arrived. When I looked at the sender's name on the letter delivered to my mailbox, it was written Violet.
Violet!
I blurted out without thinking. I hurried back to the living room. Why now? Why did I receive a letter from Violet? There's no use just thinking about it. I carefully opened the letter. There were several writing papers in it. Taking out only the writing paper, I continued reading while imagining a Violet's face. To Mom. It detailed the circumstances that had led Violet to her situation. The truth Violet penned ignited anger in me. It meticulously described how she was deceived by Andrew, her recipes stolen and forced into fraud. And finally, there was this line written in the letter.
Please take revenge on Andrew for me. That's my last request, Violet.
As I finished reading, a single tear fell onto the table. I clenched the letter, overwhelmed by a sense of powerless anger. At the same time, I resolved to take revenge on behalf of Violet. Andrew, you were only pretending to be a good person. It's my fault for not realizing it. So, I'll commend you for deceiving me until now. But that ends here. You made a fatal mistake. For taking away my dear daughter, I'll make you regret it until the end of your life. I bit my lip and reached for my mobile phone. I quickly arranged for a taxi. Violet's letter had an address written on it. There must be something important there. Violet. I should go here, right? Clutching the letter, I jumped into the taxi. Heading to the address. It was a local bank. According to Violet's letter, there seems to be something in a safe deposit box. I showed my ID to the staff and explained the situation. I also showed the bank card and key for the safe deposit box. The staff then led me to the safe deposit box. Violet had apparently told them I would be coming. I opened the box in the room I was led to. Inside were documents and a notebook. This is. I quietly read on. The documents were written by Violet. They detailed the methods and content of the fraud, and the people involved in it. The notebook was Violet's recipe notebook, containing recipes of products sold at Andrew's shop.
Violet, you did all this.
Even just from this, I could tell Violet's meticulous nature. Tears flowed as I thought of Violet. But I couldn't just sit and mourn. I quickly put the documents and notebook into my bag. Then, I noticed some jewelry. It was a heart-shaped pendant with a yellow sticky note attached. Treating it so carelessly, you wouldn't do that, Violet. Muttering, I carefully picked up the pendant. Then I saw the words on the sticky note. Instantly, I was shocked and disturbed. I clutched the pendant tightly.
Violet, I'll definitely take revenge.
Just wait. With renewed determination, I left the bank. I headed straight to a local confectionery shop. It was the family shop of Wendy, Violet's close friend. Wendy, whom I had seen at Violet's funeral, was at the shop front.
Hello, Wendy.
Violet's mom? About the other day. Wendy hugged me, and I hugged her back. There's something I want to talk about. Do you have a moment? Wendy looked towards the back. A man, presumably Wendy's father, nodded. Then, please come this way. Wendy led me to the back of the shop. The back was a residence. I was taken to the living room. As Wendy served coffee, I spoke abruptly. Actually, I received a letter from Violet.
From Violet?
Wendy was surprised and confused. Read it first. We'll talk after that. I handed Violet's letter to Wendy. Wendy read it silently, with great concentration. Eventually, she, like me, was in tears. Then, she handed the letter back to me. Thank you. I'll give this back to you first. So, what do you think?
We can't forgive him. I won't.
Wendy clenched her fist. I felt relieved knowing Wendy shared my feelings. Will you help me then? Yes. But what should I do? You're Violet's best friend, so you know about this, right? I showed her Violet's recipe notebook from the safe deposit box. Wendy immediately affirmed. This was in the safe deposit box, but the moment I saw the contents of the box, it was as if someone had whispered an idea to me. I decided to use it as part of my plan for revenge against Andrew, as Violet's wish. I explained the plan to Wendy. Then, I entrusted Violet's recipe notebook to her. Can you do this for me? For Violet's sake, yes. Wendy strongly agreed. That's the first step prepared. I felt a bit relieved. Then I quietly stood up and shook hands with Wendy. Thank you, I'm counting on you. Saying this, I left Wendy's place. I headed to another location. It was a branch of the confectionery shop where Violet used to work. The shop was quite far from the one where Violet had worked. I spent a lot of time getting there. Upon entering, I asked a woman who looked like a part-time employee. Excuse me, is Mr. Carter here? The woman looked puzzled. Then I added, my daughter worked at another shop and was helped by Mr. Carter. I showed her the employee card given to me by Andrew after Violet's funeral. The woman immediately smiled. Soon Mr. Carter came out from the back. Seeing my face, he turned pale. He recognized me as Violet's mother from the funeral. Can we talk outside for a bit? If you refuse, you know what will happen, right? I smiled at him, deliberately gentle. Thanks to that, Mr. Carter agreed readily. We moved to a nearby park, and Mr. Carter immediately apologized.
I'm so sorry. I was threatened too.
What are you talking about?
I mean,
Mr. Carter, without being asked, started confessing everything he had done. He was only approached by Andrew under threat, and he had no choice but to call out Violet. He wasn't involved in anything else. It was all Andrew who dragged him into evil. He never thought Violet would take her own life. Mr. Carter apologized to me, crying.
Apologies won't change anything. Violet will never come back.
I couldn't help but raise my voice. Mr. Carter closed his mouth, frightened. Realizing I said too much, I took a deep breath. Then, with a stern look, I asked Mr. Carter, "If you're willing to apologize, will you do me a favor?" "Yes."
Then, please testify about this incident. And don't say anything to Andrew. Understood?
Once confirmed, Mr. Carter agreed, though fearfully. Afterward, I had Mr. Carter testify everything. I recorded all of it and even let him write and sign a statement of his testimony. That's the second step done. Now, Wendy, I'm counting on you. I muttered softly, watching Mr. Carter's dejected figure return to the store. After a while, I received an invitation from Andrew.
A sweets exhibition.
It was the invitation to the very sweets exhibition. Andrew didn't know I was aware of the truth. So, the invitation boldly included these words. "We'll be showcasing sweets Violet praised highly. Please come for Violet's sake." I almost tore it up in anger. But the preparations would all be for nothing by doing so. I managed to restrain myself and waited for the day of the sweets exhibition. Day after day. I watched the calendar. Finally, the first day of the sweets exhibition arrived. I went to the venue with Violet's employee card on my chest. Upon entering, Andrew greeted me. He approached with a dubious smile, offering a handshake. "Scarlett, I'm glad you could make it." "Yes." Violet was looking forward to it, wasn't she? "Yes. I've prepared my masterpiece for this occasion." He guided me to a display filled with magnificent cakes and chocolates. I asked Andrew with a forced smile, "Which ones did you make?" "This time, I made chocolates. Valentine's Day is coming up, after all." Andrew pointed to chocolates in the center of the display. Stylishly decorated chocolates. But these were made from Violet's recipes. Thinking that made me seethe with anger. Then, a woman's voice came from behind. "May I interview you?" I turned to see a woman holding a file. Apparently a magazine journalist, with a camera. Andrew and the woman talked. After a while, the woman tilted her head, puzzled. "Excuse me, are you sure you made these?" Andrew was taken aback by her words. Then he retorted with a sneer.
"Of course I did. What are you talking about? But I saw similar ones at another store." "What? What do you mean?"
Andrew raised his voice. Several guests in the venue turned to look. The woman continued.
"The explanation and design are very similar. That's impossible. Which store is that?"
Andrew's voice grew louder. The woman, though scared, pointed to a distant location. Andrew rushed off. And I quickly followed. Soon, we arrived in front of a certain store. There, Wendy was standing by the storefront. Wendy nodded slightly when she saw me. Then she addressed Andrew. "Long time no see."
"It's you! You stole our shop's recipes."
"Stole? That's not true." Wendy smiled. Meanwhile, Andrew, red-faced, raised his voice.
"Then what's this? It's almost identical to our product."
He pointed to chocolates lined up. Almost identical to those in his shop. Then Andrew pointed to a sign at the storefront and shouted,
"And this? Doesn't melt easily even in warm places. What's this about?"
"It's our newly developed product."
"Don't joke with me. This is exactly the same as the unique method I devised."
Andrew's voice stirred up murmurs among the bystanders. But Wendy, undisturbed, retorted, "That's just a coincidence. But if it's the same, please stop using it at your shop." "What did you say?"
"This is made using a patented method developed by my father years ago." "Patented method?"
Andrew's face turned pale.